Thank you for joining us today. I'm here to introduce you to Stacy Mates from Green Things Farm Collective. She is the seed company manager, and she's going to show you today good crops for seed saving, how to store them and clean them and test them, and also show you the wet process technique for tomatoes. All right. So everyone, welcome Stacy Mates. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Thanks for coming. And I'm going to give you some more theoretical background about seed saving, and then we'll get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty, and then we'll get really into the nitty-gritty, and I'll show you how you could save your own tomato seeds at home. So first of all, the seed company is part of Green Things Farm Collective. It was 3 farms that came together in 2020 to pool resources and form one business. And so it's primarily a produce operation, but we also have a small herd of beef cattle. We have flowers, and we do a You Pick Flower CSA. And we also grow seed and have a small seed company. So that's my role at the farm. And so first of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about why saving seed is so important. This is something that's a real passion of mine. One of the companies that came together to form the collective was called Ann Arbor Seed Company, and I was part of that company from the beginning and really fell in love with seed saving and the role that it plays. So this is, you don't have to worry about the details, but there's a great person out of Michigan State University named Phil Howard, and he's been doing these analyses of industry consolidation in especially organics and in seed. And so the main takeaway here is that these 4 red circles, basically, all of these other smaller ovals are owned now by those. And those are basically the 4 sort of big players in the global seed market. They're also all pesticide companies. So basically, it's pesticide companies that produce also most of the seed that is on the market worldwide. And of course, if you are also looking to sell pesticides, you are looking to sell seeds that are built into a system where you're sort of pesticide and fertilizer reliant. And this is a worrisome thing. Just, if you only have 4 companies kind of running everything, they have a lot of power, and the decisions they make can really influence everybody's ability to grow things. Part of what we've also seen, and in connection with that consolidation, is this idea that we've lost a lot of varieties. So the top half of this picture is showing, I bet there's a little thingy. Look at that. These are showing different varieties of different crops in 1903. So lettuce, there were almost 500 different varieties in 1903 that you could buy through different seed catalogs. In 1983, there were 36. My guess is it's probably a bit smaller now. It might actually be not too much smaller, simply because now there's more interest in some of those older varieties. But the fact is, to go from 500 to 36 is worrying, because especially now, and this summer has been a great demonstration of what climate change can bring to a place like Michigan. Our farms had golf ball size hail. We've had 75-mile-per-hour winds. And so, we lost a lot of crops. And so to be able to have a broader range of different crops to draw from and different varieties to draw from that maybe are more resilient to rough conditions, that maybe grow better in different regions, we want to be able to hold on to that. So those are 2 reasons that, we want to make sure that we're saving seed. And luckily, there's lots of different alternatives that are building up. And those include, I'm going to use the fancy pointer because I love it, gardeners saving their own seeds. They include seed libraries, The library here has been doing a seed sampler every year, which is just a different form of a seed library. And then they also include small seed companies and seed swaps. So opportunities for gardeners, small companies, others to come together and trade seed and share seed. And it's, I'm most familiar with kind of this movement in the US, but this is also worldwide. There are a number of groups and individuals throughout the world who are trying to preserve crops that maybe have cultural significance or have, are just a really good variety of, tomato or squash that maybe was handed down through their family. So, to get into the how to save seed, yeah.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Are all of those varieties of seeds that were once on there completely gone? Are they saved anywhere?
That is a great question.
I'm going to ask you to repeat just so that everyone else can hear. Sorry.
Oh, good.
My question was, all of the abundance of seeds that existed a century ago,
Mm-hmm.
do those exist anywhere? Or are they completely extinct?
And as I said, it's a really good question. My guess is it's a little bit of a mix. I'm guessing probably some of those are lost completely. Some of those might be still being grown in somebody's backyard garden, but there's not like a market for them. Or they may also be, there are like sort of long-term seed storage facilities. Seed Savers Exchange, which is like a seed preservation organization in the Midwest. I know they have, it's like a deep freeze where they store seeds. So my hope is some of them are out there, and then there are new varieties being bred too. So it's not a complete like, oh my gosh, they're gone, but it's still concerning overall. Does that give you a good sense? Okay. Yep.
We have another question.
Sure.
So you may maybe talk about this, but are you going to talk about the GMO versus non-GMO seeds?
Sure. I could actually. I didn't have a specific place in here. So generally, if you're looking at vegetable seed, there are very few vegetable varieties that are GMO, which is kind of a relief from a garden standpoint if that's something you're trying to avoid. The reason also has to do with that whole seed company consolidation that I mentioned, which is that those 4 companies also, that's a big part of what they're doing, is producing genetically modified crops and doing that research. And so their focus has been on the crops that are the biggest money makers. And those are basically like large-scale commodity crops, right? They're corn, soy, alfalfa, sugar beets, interestingly, that's one also. So in general, certainly if you are buying from a small seed company, you're not going to accidentally buy genetically modified crops. I mean, honestly, like we couldn't afford to do them even if we wanted to. Like you need a lab, you need, So if that's sort of helps with concern. So if you are interested in choosing crops for seed saving, one of the first things you want to make sure is what you've got are open pollinated crops. And that just means that basically they have been bred so that the offspring will match the parent. A hybrid crop, which is sometimes called an F1, what that means is that it's a controlled cross. You had 2 different parents that are crossed. I mean, it's not like it's done, it's not a genetically modified crop. I mean, it's still just a bred crop. But those crops, if you save seed from them, you don't know what you're going to get. So like if you bought, Sun Gold's a really popular cherry tomato. That's a hybrid. If you bought Sun Golds and saved those seed, you most likely will not get something that's a Sun Gold next year. Whereas if you bought Cherokee Purple tomatoes, which is an open pollinated, save that seed, you will get Cherokee Purple next year. So it's just, sometimes it's kind of fun to see, like, if you've got the space, sure, plant a Sun Gold, see what you get. Save the seed from your favorite crop, maybe the favorite plant. Maybe you will create your own variety. So it's not like it's dangerous or anything like that. It's just you're not going to get what you expect. So you want to look for the words open pollinated or heirloom. And I know two of you mentioned this idea of like buying stuff at the grocery store. This is where that kind of can be tricky because, of course, if you're just buying a pepper or buying a tomato, unless you know for sure what the variety is, you probably don't know whether it's hybrid or whether it's open pollinated. Farmer's market might be a slightly better, because you can usually ask the farmer, like, oh, what variety is this? Do you know? Is this a hybrid? Is it an open pollinated? And not everyone will know, but a lot of them will. So, all right. If you're picking your crops, just to make your life a little easier, we want to start with a crop that'll produce seed in its first year. There's a number of common garden crops that don't actually do that. So most of your root crops, beets, carrots, they don't produce seed that first year. Yeah.
If the plant bolts and does produce seed, is it bad to keep those ones?
If it's something that's normally what's called a biennial that wouldn't produce seed for its second year, I wouldn't save that seed. Because what you've basically done is chosen a parent that is not following the correct path. And in some sense, you don't want to plant carrots that they're all going to suddenly go to seed and you won't get good carrots. So that would be the reason, yeah. And so if you're trying to save a biennial, you actually have to save those roots over the winter and plant them back out in the spring in our region because it's just too cold to leave them in the ground, which is a lot of work for somebody starting out on this. So that's why I say just pick annuals for now. That's easier. Also, a good starter is something that is self-pollinating. And so that's things like tomatoes. I'll get into some other good crops that they're just not as likely to cross, so that if you have multiple different varieties in your garden or you've got another gardener right near you, you don't have to worry about them crossing. You know what you're going to get. And here's some of what I would consider good starter crops for a starting seed saver. Tomatoes are great, peppers, lettuce, arugula, because basically there's really usually only one variety of arugula out there, so you just could plant it and it will produce seed in that first year. Peas and beans are pretty good. Dill is a great one. I haven't actually planted dill in my garden in years because it just reseeds every year. So it just kind of does its own seed saving. And a lot of common garden flowers are also good seed saving ones, and often very easy to save seed from because a lot of them, like the seed is just kind of dry on the plant, and so it's easy to tell when it's ready. All right, so the next trick is figuring out when's your seed ready. Most of your tomatoes, peppers, and melons, those are really easy because they're ready at the same time you would eat them, right? A ripe tomato is also, the seed is mature. But most crops actually mature later for viable seed than you would eat them. So I'll show you, this is mature lettuce for seed. And it's actually, it could be like this high, and it almost looks like a little thistle, and it gets this white fluff. So if you've ever had lettuce like that you didn't get to in the garden and it started to bolt, to like sort of stretch out, that's what it would eventually do. And so you could always leave one to do it and see what happens, and then collect seed from it. This next to it is spinach. Not one I'd recommend as a starter crop, but it's kind of fun because spinach actually is one of the few vegetables that this is a male plant and this is a female plant. It actually, the plants are have specific sexes. And so you actually, it's one of the reasons it's hard to grow. You have to grow enough of it that you have enough male plants and female plants to get seed. This is an Asian eggplant variety, and you can see when it's mature for seed, it's dull and kind of yellow colored. If you picked it at eating time, it wouldn't be ready. And this is a summer squash. Same thing, it tends to get yellow. Cucumbers also, you want them when they look yellow and kind of almost hard on the outside. So, and then anything like peas or beans, You want to get them where they're all dry and crispy, like you would be harvesting a dry bean. Dill or cilantro, any of those herbs, you would get those dry seed heads, and you want them fully brown. Same with flowers. You really want them to be fully brown, and usually the seed will come off the plant very easily when it's fully dry. That's also a good clue for those. And then, like I said, there's biennials, most of your root crops, and things like kale, collards, cabbage. Those are all ones that will not produce seed till the second year. Radishes, I know you said you grow radishes. Radishes are one that actually will produce seed in the first year. So you could get away with doing radishes. So you've chosen your seed. We're going to talk first about the seed that's already dry when you're harvesting it. So this isn't seed that comes out of a fruit. This would be seed like dill or beans, where it's already dry on the plant. And so your first step is to harvest that seed and dry it as much as possible. You can get old window screens at, like the Reuse Center the Reuse Center's gone, isn't it? Shoot. The Habitat for Humanity, that's what I'm thinking of. Their Restore. Window screens work great for drying because you get that airflow. Old pillowcases, just turn them inside out so you don't have seams, and you could like hang them in your attic or in a dry space. Yep, just put the seed inside and let it dry. Or you could even just spread a cloth on top of something. The idea is you just want to get airflow if you can. Ideally, you want it in a place with lots of airflow. Maybe put a fan on it. Not super hot, maybe not right out in the sun, but warm is fine. We tend to use, because we're drying at scale, we have big tarps that we spread everything out, and we have them in a greenhouse that we just leave everything until it's really dry and crispy. And this on the left, this is onion that's drying. It's a really fun one. And then obviously some beans. All right, and then your next step is you want to separate the seed out from the rest of the plant, which we usually call chaff. And so that's where you're using threshing and screens. And so threshing could be as simple as, you have a dill stalk, you just rub it between your hands to get the seed out, or even pull off the seed. Like that would technically be threshing. Screens, if you're doing it at home, you could just look for things with holes. The idea is that you want stuff that the seed falls through and the other pieces of the plant, the chaff, stays on top. So like an old crate, a sieve, colanders are great. If you like building things, this is like a really simple screen where you just take like hardware cloth and just attach it to a little wooden frame. I would recommend putting something on this side so you don't catch your fingers and bleed all of your seed, which I have done a few times. But and you can get different types of hardware cloth, and so you suddenly have all different kinds of screens. If you are doing this at a commercial level, we actually have, that's one of the things that we bought as a seed company, is we actually have commercial screens that are, designed to be really good for particular crops. But for garden saving, there's no reason. You can just invent whatever you want. Another thing that works really well, there we go. If you have something like beans and peas, you can spread them out on a tarp and just kind of dance around on top of them. That's a great way, if it's nice and dry, the pods will break apart and the seed will come out. And you can just kind of then put it through one of your screens and get what you need. And something like lettuce works really well to use a metal window screen. It's just abrasive enough that you can kind of rub, because the lettuce has all that fluff, you can just rub it on it and it separates the fluff from the seed. So once you've kind of separated the seed from the chaff, the rest of the plant, now you want to get rid of that chaff. And that's where winnowing comes in. That is Eric, the former owner of Ann Arbor Seed Company, demonstrating winnowing. It looks like an unholy mess. But what you've got here is he's got the bucket, and it's got a mix of seed and chaff in it, and he's pouring it in front of a fan. And then he's got a bin right in front of the fan, just for like non-panic purposes. We put a second bin so that if you sneeze while you're doing this, you don't worry about all your seed blowing away. But the fact is, the seed, which is heavier, is actually falling into this first bin, and the chaff is either blowing into the second bin or blowing down onto the floor. So, you can do it on a back step. Just set up a fan on a still day and, pour your seed in front of it. Oops, sorry, I just lost my thing. There we go. Obviously, in many places where people are saving seed using more traditional methods, they just use the wind. And so, but you can experiment. I have not learned how to just use the wind, but I'm pretty good with a fan. And it's amazing how clean you can get the seed just by pouring it in front of a fan a few times. All right, so now we're going to talk, and I'm going to demonstrate how to save seed from when the seed is encased in a fruit. Tomatoes are an extra easy one, but you would use some variation of this method for anything like eggplant, peppers, squash, cucumbers. So I'm going to be showing up here. If anybody wants to move closer, please feel free so you can see what I'm doing. We tried to set up a camera and didn't really have a good system, but we're a small group, so please don't be shy. Awesome. All right, so this is an open pollinated variety of tomato called Speckled Roman that I brought from the farm. It's actually one we're saving for seed this year, so we had lots of extra. It's nice and ripe. And I just like cutting it in half so you can see where all the seed is, and then just squeezing out the pulp and the seed into a jar. And ideally, if you have more than one plant of a particular variety, it's nice to get some tomatoes from each plant. So, maybe you say, oh, great, I'll save 2 tomatoes from each plant or so, just because the more variety you have in your supply, the better. This one had a bad spot inside, so I'd probably just skip it. And that way I don't have to worry about accidentally introducing some disease into my saved seed. Yeah.
So if you see any black spot or anything blemish, you don't use that one?
I mean, it kind of is up to you. If it's the only tomato you have, I would probably save it anyway. It's, in this case, I have plenty, so I'm not worried about it. But, yeah, so cut up one more. If you were doing something that gets kind of hard once it's mature, like a cucumber, you may not be able to just squeeze it out. So I would recommend, you could cut it like lengthwise and scoop out the seed with a spoon and put it in here.
So for the cucumber, do you do the same thing as the wet method?
Yes, you would also do the wet method. All right, so I've got my seed in here. You can see there's seed and pulp, and they're all kind of mixed up together. And I love using canning jars for it because you can put something on top to keep flies out, but it's still open to the air and it's nice and secure. But honestly, you can just stick a cloth over it. Like, it doesn't have to be fancy. And then what you want to do is for your tomatoes or squash, you want to let it ferment for a couple days. And that'll do a few things. You know how when you have a tomato that there's like that goo kind of around each seed? That'll actually ferment away the goo. It'll also actually do sort of the threshing job. It's actually separating the seed from the pulp. And so what I do is just every day or whenever I see it, I just keep my jar in the kitchen and I just give it a little swish, just stir it up and let it sit for a few days. Yeah.
Some things like a little on the drier side, like the
That's a great question. You can add a little bit of water, as little water, extra water as possible, just because that can sometimes trigger the seeds to sprout rather than, to ferment properly. But you can add a little bit. And yes, for something like an eggplant, you might need to. So I've got my jar. Yeah.
So what, during that 2 or 3 days,
Mm-hmm.
what if it's like moldy or like, because I did it before and I saw like all the white stuff. I said, oh, that is like,
That's exactly what you want.
really?
Yes.
You want that?
Yes, and I'm sad to say this is stuff that I started on Thursday. It did have some white mold on top. Unfortunately, it got nice and stirred on my way here, so you can't see it anymore. But yes, a little bit of mold on top is great. You want it to smell not great because it's fermented. That's exactly what you want. But the other thing you can hopefully see is that the seeds are now at the bottom, and the top is just the fermented pulp. If there are a few seeds on top, those probably aren't mature. So this has basically done a great job of telling you which are your good seeds. So yeah, that white mold is actually a good thing. And then seeing that the seeds are at the bottom, that's kind of your other clue that it's ready. If like it's a cool period, it might take an extra day. I probably wouldn't give it more than 3, maybe 4 days at the most, just because you don't want to start the seeds sprouting. Yeah.
Are the peppers a wet method as well? Like bell pepper?
Peppers are a wet method because with most peppers, you don't have like the same pulp. What you could do with peppers is just cut them open, scoop out the seed, and like separate it by hand from. Yeah, peppers are even easier. Honestly, you can kind of skip step 2 and go right to even step 4. Yeah. Yeah. So peppers. Eggplant, I don't know how much people would want to save seed from eggplant, but you can, in that case, rubbing it through some kind of screen could separate out the seed from the pulp. But peppers, yeah, you could probably just pull the seed out and immediately spread it out to dry. So it's a little bit simpler. All right, so I've got my fermented tomato with the seeds at the bottom. And got some water. And so what I'm going to show now is the decanting process. So I add a bunch of water, and everything will kind of swirl around for a second, and I give it a second for the seeds to settle back down. I'm going to do this up on the table because it's probably easier to see. All right, and now I'm very carefully pouring off the water and the pulp. And you can see the seeds are still there because they stayed at the bottom. And then I just keep repeating that process. Add lots of water, let it settle, and then very slowly And I think you can see at this point we're getting closer and closer to just having clear water on top and just seeds at the bottom. So it could take a few times, obviously, of pouring. Now some of those bigger chunks of pulp are coming out. I might help them along. And I'm guessing this will be our last pour. Yeah, so see, now I just have water and seeds. And so, to finish it off, I can just pour it through a sieve. And then for letting the seed dry, I would recommend not using a paper towel because it'll stick. I love, like, a cookie sheet's great, or paper plate, anything like that, where, again, that Windows screen, if you have a little piece of Windows screen. And I would just spread out the seed. And this would be a good time to, again, get a fan on it, put it in a nice dry place, and usually takes, I don't know, depending on, how much airflow you have, like 3 or 4 days.
So not in the hot sun.
Correct. Not in the hot sun. That can kind of make things, that can sometimes, for certain seeds, it can kind of make them go dormant, or they won't sprout as well. So yeah, so dry, but not direct sun. And put a fan on it, give it a few days, and then you'll see, like if it's tomato seed, it'll start to look fuzzy. And then you can always pick up the seed and rub it between your hands just to like separate out any of the clumps. And you will have viable seed that you can save. So any questions on this process that you've seen before I keep going? No. All right. So once you've dried your seed, something that you might want to do is test your germination. And that's a way to know, did I do a good job? Is it going to be viable? Doing it at home is really easy. You would just count out some seeds. 10 is a good minimum. As many, the more the better. And then you spread them out on like a damp paper towel. You can fold the towel over the seeds, and then I just put it in like one of those Ziploc bags, but don't seal the bag. Obviously, if you're saving more than one, I recommend labeling the bag because then otherwise it's hard to remember. And then some crops really need warmth to sprout, things like tomatoes, peppers, all those warm season crops. So if you can put the bag in a pretty warm place, you're going to have better results. But then after 4 to 5 days, you can count how many seeds have sprouted and take those off your towel, and then you can leave the towel for another 4 to 5 days. And again, see, did you get 9 seeds out of 10 sprouting? Maybe you only got 4 seeds out of 10. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't use that seed. It just might mean like you plant them a little closer together in the garden, or if you're starting like your tomato plants indoors, maybe you put 3 seeds in each cell and then pull out 2 if they all sprout. But just like, give yourself a little backup. And then storing seed, once your seed is dry, I keep all my seed for myself in the basement. It's fine. It's dry enough. I know people swear by keeping it in the fridge. I just don't have room in my fridge. So basement's good. Jars are great. Most seed will last for years. So if you've bought, you bought seed at the store and you're not sure, you could always do a germination test. Or like I said, you could just plant a little extra and sort of figure it'll probably be okay. The only exceptions are things like onions and carrot family tend to not last as long. Those might be ones that, I wouldn't go more than about 2 years before I would either test them or buy new seed. But we stopped selling it just because it started to seem ridiculous. But we grew a tomato variety in 2012, and as of last year, 10 years later, we were still getting something like 80% germination from that silly 10-year-old tomato. So, and this is some places, because you're not going to pull everything out of one session, but these are some great places to get information. Seed Savers Exchange, they have a lot of different resources for gardeners. Organic Seed Alliance, that's a little bit more technical, but it's also really useful. And then these are 2 of my favorite books. This one I went up and grabbed before we started. They have it here at the library. If you only wanted one book, this one is great. It's got everything that I've said here is in here somewhere, and it has these really nice, it's divided by variety. So if you're planning to save cucumber, you can just look at the cucumber section. And then they have these charts in the back that show different things like how far apart should you make sure your varieties are before you try to save seed. If you really wanted to get fancy, what kind of screen would you use to clean this? So it really would be like a great a great resource if you were trying to start up doing some seed saving. And Seed to Seed, that is an older, this is basically a rewrite of that. It's an older version, might be one you'd find at like a thrift store or something, so also one to look for. And yeah, so that is what I've got, and I've left lots of time for questions.